Where is Mujtaba Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader? The 56-year-old became leader at the start of the Iran war after his father, Ali Khamenei, was killed by US-Israeli strikes.
The man who was appointed as Iran's supreme leader is lying in a hospital bed in Tehran, in a coma, unaware of his own appointment. Mujtaba Khamenei, chosen to lead the Islamic Republic after a joint American-Israeli operation eliminated his father, Ali Khamenei, the IRGC commander, the armed forces chief, the defense minister, and 48 senior officials simultaneously on February 28. The appointment was meant to fill the vacuum before it could be exploited, to give the surviving factions a new center of gravity. He went into a coma shortly after. And in the absence of anyone capable of making final decisions, something has begun inside Tehran that Washington, Beijing, and Moscow did not fully anticipate. Iran's own president publicly demanded that Hormuz be reopened. Iran's foreign minister announced the strait was open to all commercial vessels. And on the same day that announcement was made, the IRGC opened fire on tankers. The same regime, the same day, two completely opposite orders. State television then called the foreign minister stupid, on air, in public. What is happening inside Iran right now is not a government in crisis. It is a government that has ceased to function as a single entity. And what emerges from this collapse will determine whether the Strait of Hormuz opens or whether something far more dangerous begins. To understand how Iran arrived at this moment, you need to understand what the Islamic Republic looked like before the collapse began. Iran's power structure was always built around competing centers of authority: the presidency, the supreme leader, the IRGC, the parliament, the guardian council, each with its own institutional interests, each with its own interpretation of the revolution's mandate. But that complexity was managed by one thing: the unquestioned supremacy of the supreme leader's office as the final arbiter of every significant decision. Ali Khamenei held that role for more than 3 decades. Whatever his personal limitations, whatever internal tensions simmered beneath his authority, his presence at the apex of the system created a gravitational center around which everything else organized. When factions clashed, there was a court of last resort. When competing agendas threatened to spiral into open conflict, there was a figure capable of imposing resolution. On February 28th, that figure was gone. The command architecture of the Islamic Republic, built over 45 years to concentrate final authority in a single ideological hierarchy, was decapitated in a single operation. Mujtaba Khamenei was appointed as the third supreme leader on March 9th. He was meant to provide continuity, to fill the vacuum before it could be exploited. He is in intensive care. The control room of a regime possessing nuclear capabilities is empty. And 4 men, raised in the same IRGC barracks in the 1980s, tempered in the same war, carrying 4 decades of accumulated grievances toward each other, have moved into that vacuum simultaneously. Their names are Vahidi, Ghalibaf, Zolgadar, and Rezai. And understanding who they are is essential to understanding why Iran cannot currently speak with a single voice. Ahmad Vahidi is the most dangerous name on that list. He commanded the Quds Force from 1988 to 1997 before Soleimani. He carries an Interpol notice from Argentina connected to command responsibility for the 1994 bombing of a Buenos Aires Jewish community center that killed 85 people. Vahidi was appointed as IRGC commander on March 1st. His worldview is not complicated. The war must continue. The strait must stay closed. Negotiations with the United States must be rejected. And here is the reality that drives every calculation Vahidi makes. The IRGC's budget, power, political influence, and claim to institutional relevance all depend on the existence of external enemies and active conflict. In war, the IRGC is indispensable. In peace, its massive budget becomes a political question. Its proxy networks become a diplomatic liability. Its internal security apparatus becomes an obstacle to economic normalization. For Vahidi, peace is not an option. It is an existential threat to everything he commands. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf sits at the opposite end of the practical spectrum. As parliament speaker and head of Iran's negotiation delegation in Islamabad, Ghalibaf has arrived at a conclusion that Vahidi treats as betrayal. The economic reality is unsurvivable. Iran is absorbing $270 billion in war damage. The currency is at its lowest point in history. Infrastructure has been shattered from Isfahan's industrial zones to the port facilities at Bushehr and Bandar Abbas. Ghalibaf is not a reformist. He is not pro-American. He is not ideologically distant from the revolution. He is a regime survivor calculating that the only path to regime survival runs through negotiation, economic relief, and a deal that stops the bleeding before there is nothing left to save. Foreign Minister IRGC announced on April 17th that Hormuz was open to commercial vessels. He was attempting to signal de-escalation to international partners. The IRGC opened fire on tankers the same day. State television called IRGC stupid on air. Two factions, two sets of orders, one regime. And here is the part that stunned Washington. This level of open internal contradiction, broadcast publicly in real time, is something American intelligence analysts had not seen from the Islamic Republic since its founding years. Iran has always had internal factions. It has never publicly imploded like this before. The vacuum at the top is making everything worse, because the figure who would normally arbitrate between these factions cannot communicate. Every decision Ghalibaf makes, every negotiating position the Islamabad delegation advances, every concession or condition attached to the talks is being taken on the authority of a coma patient. The approval is imaginary. The mandate is invented. For Vahidi, this creates a perpetual veto mechanism. Every decision Ghalibaf claims authorization for is challengeable. Every concession the negotiating team makes can be declared unauthorized. Every deal IRGC signs can be repudiated by the IRGC on the grounds that no legitimate supreme leader approval was obtained. The coma is not just a leadership vacuum. In Vahidi's hands, it is a retroactive veto against any outcome the hardliners dislike. And into this fractured landscape, the economic clock is running faster than any of them anticipated. Before the American blockade, Iran was exporting 1,850,000 barrels of oil per day, almost entirely to China, generating approximately $150 million in daily revenue. That revenue funded soldier salaries, government operations, proxy network financing, the entire financial architecture through which the Islamic Republic projected power across the region. That revenue is now zero. Storage capacity is filling. Pressure in the pipelines behind the storage is building to dangerous levels. According to reporting by Rudaw, Iran has a window of 10 to 15 days before it must begin shutting down oil wells entirely. Oil well shutdown is not a reversible decision. It is a geological event with permanent consequences. When underground pressure is released by forced shutdown, reservoir damage accumulates that can permanently reduce a well's future production capacity. Some wells, once shut down under these conditions, cannot be fully restored. Every day the blockade holds, Iran's long-term oil production capacity is being permanently reduced. Trump stated that Iran is losing $5 to $100 million per day. The math is not sustainable for any government, let alone one that is simultaneously fighting a war, absorbing reconstruction costs, and watching its internal factions publicly contradict each other on national television. And then came the pressure from directions that even Vahidi did not expect. China's President Xi Jinping called Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and explicitly stated that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to normal passage, characterizing it as an international waterway in the common interest of regional countries and the international community. Read that carefully. China called Saudi Arabia, not Iran, not its 25-year strategic partner, not the country with which Beijing signed a comprehensive partnership promising hundreds of billions in investment. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf state that sits on the opposite side of every Iranian security calculation. The signal embedded in that choice is precise. China is telling the region that its priority is the waterway, not the Islamic Republic. Beijing purchased 90% of Iran's oil exports before the blockade. Now China is publicly pressuring its own supplier to stop what it is doing because Chinese ships were being fired on by Iranian forces while simultaneously being seized by American forces. China is indirectly strengthening Ghalibaf's negotiating faction, not because Beijing cares about Iranian political dynamics, but because China's energy security and Gulf commercial interests all point toward negotiation as the only acceptable outcome. Russia's position is simultaneously more cynical. Foreign Minister Lavrov appeared at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, condemned the American blockade as unlawful, defended Iran's nuclear rights, and then said something that stripped the performance of all ambiguity. Russia is ready to supply energy resources to China and other countries affected by the crisis. Russia is performing solidarity with Iran while explicitly advertising its readiness to replace Iran in the energy markets Iran is losing. Every barrel of Iranian oil that cannot reach China is a barrel Russia can sell at a price Iran can no longer contest. Russia benefits economically from every day the blockade holds, and Iran's oil sits in full storage tanks with nowhere to go. Iran has achieved a geopolitical isolation that even its most determined enemies could not have engineered through direct pressure alone. America is the declared enemy. Israel is the declared enemy. And now, China is publicly pressuring Iran to stand down while Russia prepares to fill the market gap Iran is creating. The proxy network that gave Iran regional reach across 4 decades is collapsing simultaneously. Hezbollah's senior leadership has been eliminated. Hamas has been crushed in Gaza. The Houthis are in direct naval combat with American forces in the Red Sea. The 3 pillars of Iranian regional influence that Vahedi's entire strategic doctrine was built around are gone. What remains is an IRGC commander whose war policy has cost Iran, its allies, its oil revenue, its international relationships, and now its internal unity. The doctrine failed. The cost is still being paid. Here is what Iran's internal collapse means for America, and it is the dimension that changes the entire strategic calculation. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic presented itself to the world as a unified revolutionary state. Internally fractured, yes. Competing factions, yes. But capable of projecting a coherent strategic direction externally when it mattered most. That coherence is gone, and America did not destroy it through military force. America destroyed it by sustaining economic pressure long enough for Iran's internal contradictions to consume the regime from within. The blockade is not just a naval operation. It is a pressure mechanism that is accelerating every internal fracture Iran already had. Every day the oil revenue stays at zero. Ghalibaf's pragmatic faction gains legitimacy and Vahedi's war faction loses it. Every day the wells approach forced shutdown. The survival calculus inside the regime shifts further toward the negotiating table. What often gets overlooked is this: America did not need to invade Iran. America did not need to escalate beyond the blockade. America needed to hold the line long enough for Iran's own internal dynamics to do what external pressure alone never could. Every American taxpayer who funds the naval assets enforcing this blockade should understand what their investment is producing right now inside Tehran. A regime that is publicly contradicting itself, a supreme leader who cannot give orders, an IRGC commander whose war doctrine is being challenged by China, opposed by the Iranian president, and undermined by an economic reality that makes continued conflict unsurvivable. The United States held firm, and Iran began to tear itself apart. This is what American strategic patience actually looks like. Not a single dramatic strike, not a ground invasion. Sustained, disciplined pressure applied at the exact point where the regime is most vulnerable, held long enough for the internal collapse to begin on its own terms. The foreign minister called stupid on national television. The president demanding the strait open while the IRGC closes it. The supreme leader in a coma. The oil wells 10 to 15 days from forced shutdown. China publicly aligned with Gulf states over Iran. Russia preparing to replace Iran in the markets Iran is losing. 4 men from the barracks of 1988 are running out of time to decide whether they save the regime or destroy it. One of them, Vahedi, does not want to save it. He wants to preserve what the regime built for the IRGC regardless of the cost to everything else. And tomorrow, when the deadline arrives and the world asks whether Iran is coming to the table, it will be Vahedi's calculation more than anyone else's that provides the answer. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic managed its internal divisions well enough to project strength outward. For the first time, those divisions are consuming the regime faster than external pressure ever could. And America, for the first time, is watching Iran collapse from the inside without firing a single additional shot. Did the IRGC just hand America the most important strategic victory of this entire conflict by turning on its own government? Or does Vahedi still have a move that stabilizes the hardline position before the oil wells go dark? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment. If you want daily coverage that does not sugarcoat what is actually happening, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I post every single day, and I am not stopping.